On today's episode of True Echo, we bring you a story of quiet strength, defiance without a word, and a moment so powerful it left an entire aerospace conference stunned. When a black woman Air Force pilot was told to take off her uniform because it made others uncomfortable, she didn't argue. She didn't fight back. She just flew, straight into history, at 800 miles per hour. Stay with us, because what Major Tamika Daniels did next will echo in your mind long after the screen fades to black. Tamika Daniels had always believed that silence could speak louder than words, especially when backed by velocity, altitude, and undeniable skill. That belief had guided her from the dusty streets of Converse, Texas, to the cockpit of a Rafale fighter jet, a machine so advanced most people wouldn't even recognize it from a distance. But long before she commanded skies, she learned to navigate rooms filled with invisible boundaries and quiet expectations. It was 4:45 a.m. when she rose, her internal clock synced with the rhythm of a pilot's life. The sky outside her temporary quarters was still pitch black, stars dimming slowly in the Nevada desert. She stood before a mirror, adjusting the collar of her flight suit with precision, her patch reading Major T. Daniels sitting just beneath her squadron insignia. This wasn't just fabric. This was armor stitched with years of resilience, sweat, and hours that would break most people. Every fold, every stripe, told a story. Today, she wasn't prepping for a mission. She was heading to a private aerospace conference just outside Tonopah. It was a gathering of top-tier defense contractors, military advisors, and investors, the kind of people who thought in billions and signed deals behind closed glass doors. Tamika wasn't there to pitch or schmooze. She was an invited speaker on coalition integration, representing not just the U.S. Air Force, but also the multinational NATO pilot exchange. She had earned her seat, not through favors or photo shoots, but through logged hours, field-tested grit, and the respect of pilots across 2 continents. When she entered the conference lobby, the shift was subtle but familiar. The room was a sea of crisp suits, high heels, and glassy smiles. Conversations floated like drone hums, polite, professional, performative. As she made her way to the check-in table, Tamika noticed the pause in the receptionist's hand. He glanced up, eyes darting briefly to her name patch, then quickly away, almost embarrassed by his own confusion. "Hi, welcome. Are you here with logistics?" "No," she said, evenly. "Major Tamika Daniels. I'm speaking at the 11:30 panel on coalition integration." His mouth moved before his brain could catch up. "Right, just one moment." He stepped back, whispering urgently to a nearby woman with pressed hair and a clipped tone. Tamika stood still, hands calm at her sides, watching without emotion. She'd seen this play out before. The woman approached, eyes cool and professional. "I'm sorry, Major, but this event is business attire only." Tamika blinked once. "This is my business attire." "We understand," the woman said, voice tightening. "But we're maintaining a certain tone for our attendees. Perhaps you could step out and change. There's a restroom just around the corner." "This isn't a costume," Tamika said. "It's the uniform of a U.S. Air Force combat pilot." "I'm sure you understand," the woman said, with a smile that had no warmth. Tamika didn't argue. She didn't ask for the name of the organizer or cite her credentials. She simply nodded once and turned away. Out in the parking lot, the heat of the desert sun wrapped around her as she climbed into her rental car. She sat there, gripping the wheel, the weight of decades pressing in. It wasn't anger that filled her. It was clarity. This wasn't about dress code or decorum. It was about who they thought belonged. She unlocked her phone and scrolled to a contact labeled Caio Lefebvre, France. Her thumb hovered for a moment before she tapped call. It rang twice. "Tamika," came the voice on the other end, gravelly, familiar, French. "I didn't expect a call from you so soon." "I need a favor," she said. "Is this about training or trouble?" "Depends how you define trouble." She explained in short, clipped sentences. No emotion, just facts. Colonel Arnaud Lefebvre, her old commanding officer during the Rafale exchange, didn't ask her to repeat it. "Let me make a few calls," he said. "I'll text you the rest." The call ended. She exhaled slowly. Tamika's thoughts drifted to the past, to afternoons on her childhood porch, watching jets streak across the Texas sky. To the words her father had told her when she first announced her dream at 11, "Then you better be better than good, baby girl. You're gonna walk into rooms where no one wants you there, and still have to fly like you belong." She had taken those words and built her life around them. By 17, she was the only girl, and the only black cadet, in her high school's JROTC. At the Air Force Academy, she kept her room spotless, her grades sharp, and her eyes forward. While some instructors called her Ms. Daniels instead of cadet, and others whispered about diversity quotas, she climbed anyway. Her first combat flight was out of Djibouti, guiding a NATO drone out of hostile airspace under fire. She made it back. Her wingman did too. Then came the NATO exchange and the Rafale. She still remembered what one of the French pilots asked her during training: "Americans already have the F-22. Why come here?" "To learn what the F-22 can't teach," she'd replied. Now, sitting in the car, she thought of that jet again. Sleek. Unforgiving. A machine that demanded precision, and rewarded it. And she smiled. They didn't want her in the room. So, she'd come in from the sky. An hour outside Tonopah, where the desert stretched in lonely silence and the roads blurred into the mountains, a hangar door creaked open. Inside was a machine worth $90 million, a Dassault Rafale, shimmering under low lighting like a coiled blade. Most people at the conference would have recognized the name, but few had ever seen one this close. Fewer still had flown it. And only one woman in the United States had been cleared to take it airborne today. Major Tamika Daniels. The night before, she had driven from Tonopah under a blanket of stars, her thoughts as steady as her hands on the wheel. She didn't need vengeance. She didn't even need an apology. What she needed was altitude. What she needed was for them to see. Colonel Lefebvre had come through. He always did. Not only had he secured the Rafale through a joint NATO readiness agreement, he'd also made sure it was listed, quietly, as part of the surprise flyover, in the demo lineup for the next day. All above board. All documented. Just not read by the right people. When she arrived at the hangar, a young staff sergeant with oil-stained gloves and skeptical eyes met her at the gate. "Ma'am, you're flying the bird?" he asked, checking her badge twice. "That a problem?" Tamika replied without missing a beat. "No, ma'am," he said quickly, stepping aside. "Just, didn't expect the pilot to be you." She held his gaze. Neither did they. There was no further discussion. Inside the flight operations bay, she ran through the checklist with the ease of someone who had done it more times than she could count: throttle calibration, control surface integrity, radar alignment. Every dial, every switch, felt like second nature. The Rafale wasn't just a machine to her. It was a partner. And it didn't care about what she looked like or what room she'd been asked to leave. At 0420 hours, she was suited up. By 0505, the aircraft was on standby, nose pointed toward the rising sun. At 0630, helmet tucked under one arm, Tamika walked across the tarmac in full flight gear, the desert wind kicking up dust behind her boots. No audience. No camera. Just silence. Back at the conference, the same people who turned her away were sipping espressos and adjusting lapels. No one suspected anything unusual. Echelon Aerotech senior staff were reviewing the morning schedule on tablets while interns rehearsed buzzwords. To them, the day was unfolding perfectly, the right optics, the right tone. At 0711, Tamika stood on the final rung of the Rafale's ladder. She paused. Then pulled her helmet down over her head, sealing in the focus that only pilots truly understood. Control, Sierra 1, you're cleared for runway 23. Tamika, copy, Sierra 1 rolling. Her hand gripped the throttle. The Rafale surged forward. Within seconds, the ground fell away, and the Nevada desert shrank below her. She was airborne. And the sky welcomed her like it always had, without question. The first hint that something was off came just before 9 a.m. at the viewing platform. Guests filed in slowly, escorted by polished staffers with thin smiles and clipboards. Rows of chairs had been set facing the open airstrip, a long polished terrace dotted with water stations and military branding. Marissa Gibbons, the event coordinator who had dismissed Tamika the day before, was already reviewing the morning's lineup when one of the Canadian delegates pointed toward the far horizon. "What's that?" he asked, squinting. "A black dot. Fast-moving. No contrail. Too low." Marissa frowned. "Canadian flight's not until 10:30. Another observer chimed in, lifting binoculars. "That's not ours." Then the sound hit. Low. Heavy. Like thunder being pulled across metal. It wasn't a demonstration. It was a statement. The Rafale tore across the sky just above the legal altitude, slicing the air like a whispered threat. Sleek and brutal. It wasn't just flying, it was dancing. The kind of maneuver that no simulator could teach and no drone could replicate. The crowd gasped. Phones lifted instinctively. Even the announcer at the podium, a retired Navy pilot named Al Kendrick, went momentarily silent. Back inside the conference hall, executives stopped mid-sentence. People turned toward the windows, drawn like moths. No one knew who it was. Until the tower chimed in through Kendrick's headset. Confirmed flyby. Rafale piloted by Major Tamika Daniels, U.S. Air Force. Joint NATO program. A breath caught in someone's throat. Then the murmur rippled through the crowd. Wait. That's the woman they wouldn't let in yesterday. There was no fanfare. No apology. Just that name echoing across the platform like thunder on steel. Marissa's clipboard dipped. She said nothing. Tamika banked left at 900 feet, rolled inverted, and pulled a controlled climb that kissed the sun. Then dropped again in a clean arc, nose to the ground, wings slicing through the warming air with pinpoint precision. She was sending a message. Not in anger. Not in defiance. In fluency. In the language only a pilot could speak, the one that didn't need translation. Brian Qualls, the intern who had watched her walk out the day before with clenched fists and quiet shame, stood near the back, his mouth slightly open. He didn't cheer. He didn't film. He just watched, wide-eyed, like he was finally seeing someone who made his own hopes feel a little less foolish. Tamika climbed one last time, then leveled out. No stunts. No fireworks. Just perfect flight. The kind that leaves the world a little quieter when it passes. And then, just as fast as she'd arrived, she was gone, disappearing behind the hills, the sky sealing behind her like a signature. But the silence she left in her wake would not be forgotten. The runway baked under the rising desert sun as Tamika brought the Rafale in low, flaring out with the precision of a scalpel. The tires shrieked once against the tarmac, then gripped hard. She kept the landing smooth, effortless, like she'd done it 100 times before. Because she had. The control tower cleared her for taxi. Tamika didn't respond. She didn't need to. The language of control and command didn't always require words. Her fingers moved like they were part of the plane. She brought the Rafale to a full stop in the designated staging area, engine winding down, canopy still closed. Inside the viewing platform, the silence lingered. 100 conversations stalled mid-sentence. Coffee cups frozen halfway to lips. Eyes wide, searching, reprocessing everything they'd just seen. And then, finally, the announcement crackled across the speaker system. Rafale flyby completed. Pilot, Major Tamika Daniels, U.S. Air Force, Joint NATO Exchange. This flyover was authorized in conjunction with Allied protocols. That name again. People looked at each other. The energy shifted. The woman they'd dismissed, no, disqualified, had just outflown every expectation they'd brought to that rooftop. She hadn't just matched the room's prestige. She'd erased it. Rewritten it. Replaced it with something they couldn't control, respect that wasn't granted, but earned. At the edge of the tarmac, the jet's canopy finally hissed open. Tamika reached up, unfastened her helmet, and lifted it off slowly, letting the dry Nevada air flood into the cockpit. She took a moment, eyes closed, letting the noise of the jet's shutdown wash over her like a hymn. When she stood and descended the ladder, boots striking metal with rhythmic certainty, there was no need for an introduction. She was the one everyone was already talking about. At the end of the viewing platform, Marissa Givens stood frozen. She had removed her sunglasses but hadn't put them away, they dangled from her fingers like an afterthought. The clipboard she'd clutched all morning now hung limply at her side. She watched Tamika walk toward the group, helmet under her arm, flight suit immaculate, her squadron insignia gleaming in the morning sun. No one dared speak first. Not the executive who'd waved her off the day before. Not the colonel who had laughed politely at the idea of a joint program featuring her. Certainly not the woman who had told her to step out and change. Tamika didn't smile. Didn't gloat. She simply stood in front of them, silent, steady, letting the jet at her back finish the statement she had just made with steel and sky. Finally, someone stepped forward. A tall woman in a navy pantsuit with Air Mobility Command pins on her lapel. Colonel Reyes, she said, extending her hand. USAMC. That was one hell of a maneuver, Major. Tamika shook her hand firmly. Just keeping the flight hours up, ma'am. Reyes chuckled. Next time you decide to shake a conference like that, let me know. I'll bring popcorn. Tamika allowed the barest flicker of a smile. Behind her, someone started to clap. It was soft at first, tentative, then more hands joined. It built slowly. Not polite. Not performative. Real. Even Marissa clapped, though her face remained unreadable. A murmur rose from the back of the platform. That's the one from yesterday, someone whispered. They told her she didn't belong here. Guess she brought her own invitation, another replied. Back in the crowd, Brian Qualls stood taller than he had in days. He didn't cheer. He didn't film. He just watched her, the woman they tried to erase, now standing at the very center of everything they valued. He felt something tighten in his throat. Pride? Maybe. Relief? Absolutely. But most of all, he felt seen. Inside the conference building, the energy had shifted. The flyover hadn't been on the schedule in bold ink. It had been tucked in the appendix of a NATO operations briefing, one that most echelon Aerotech staff had skimmed, at best. Now they were scrambling to rewrite the story. Executives crowded around screens, reviewing security footage, trying to figure out how something that dramatic had slipped through their careful control. There was no technical violation, no breach of protocol. Just a complete obliteration of their assumptions. She didn't even RSVP, one senior official said, half panicked. She didn't need to, replied a junior analyst. She was already on the flight manifest. You just didn't look. Marissa stood off to the side, silent, jaw clenched. The emails in her inbox were already piling up. Subject lines read. Need explanation Rafale pilot. Clarify event protocols ASAP. Board wants response to flyby story. Too late. The moment had already gone viral. By mid-afternoon, someone had uploaded footage to Twitter, a 6-second clip of the Rafale tearing across the platform, inverted, the crowd gasping audibly. By dinner, it had over 1.8 million views. No caption necessary. Just the sound. Just the flight. And one pinned comment at the top, you told her to change clothes. She changed the altitude instead. That comment alone got over 70,000 likes. Meanwhile, Tamika sat inside the cool shade of the auxiliary hangar where the Rafale was being inspected. She sipped from a cold water bottle, helmet beside her, eyes still locked on the empty sky beyond the bay door. Staff Sergeant Mark Bledsoe walked over, holding a sealed envelope and a tablet. "Ma'am," he said, offering both. "Debrief packet. And, a note." She took them without looking up. "Appreciate it." He paused, then added, "You really shook them up out there." "I wasn't trying to," she said calmly. "Maybe not," he replied. "But sometimes they need to be shaken." He walked off. Tamika didn't move. Didn't open the envelope. She just kept staring at the horizon, like she was already planning the next flight. Because for her, this wasn't a climax. This was a course correction. And she had just begun. Back at the conference, the rest of the day unfolded like business as usual, at least, on the surface. The Canadian F-35 team took to the sky next. Clean, tight formation. Impressive specs. But it didn't stir the crowd. The Italians brought flair with their Eurofighter flyby, loops, engine flares, a barrel roll over the ridge. And still, the murmurs were the same. Not like the Rafale. "Yeah, but did you see that roll? Who is she again?" The truth was, they were no longer watching jets. They were comparing them, to her. A day that was supposed to be about drones, contracts, and partnerships had quietly become the story of one woman who wasn't on the guest list, but flew straight into the headlines anyway. And no one could stop talking about it. Tamika Daniels hadn't just flown. She'd redefined the tone of the entire summit. Inside the hallways of Echelon Aerotech's polished conference pavilion, conversations shifted from strategy to damage control. One department lead stormed into a side room with Marissa Givens and tossed down a printout of a news article that had already gone live. Uninvited, undeniable, Black woman pilot dominates aerospace summit flyover. Major Tamika Daniels, USAF, steals the show in unlisted Rafale demo. Sources confirm she was dismissed the day before for not wearing business attire. "Tell me this isn't true," the exec barked. Marissa stared at the headline, lips pressed into a tight line. "It's out of context. She's on NATO's liaison list," he snapped. "She was cleared to fly. Why didn't you flag this?" "I followed the protocol. She didn't fit the standard attendee profile." The man leaned closer. "What she fit was a Rafale cockpit better than half our team's ego fits in their suits." There was nothing more to say. The optics they tried so hard to control had flipped on them, publicly, virally. And worst of all, they hadn't even seen it coming. Meanwhile, across town in a small cafe near the airstrip, Brian Qualls sat with his laptop open, fingers hovering above the keys. He wasn't writing emails. He was writing notes, observations, quotes, ideas. Not for a presentation. Not for work. For himself. He couldn't stop replaying the moment Tamika's Rafale cut through the sky. He hadn't realized how much weight he'd been carrying until he saw her fly, and suddenly, all those little microcuts he'd endured at Echelon didn't seem like things he had to quietly swallow anymore. An hour into his impromptu writing session, his inbox dinged. A message from a woman he vaguely remembered, one of the Canadian aerospace reps he'd spoken to briefly at the viewing platform. Subject: "Your name stuck with me. Brian. I saw the flyby this morning. And I remembered you from the drone floor. Thought you might want to know, we're launching a Young Innovator Fellowship in Quebec next quarter. Your profile came up in my search. Would you be interested in applying?" He read it twice. Then leaned back in his seat. Maybe Tamika hadn't just flown for herself. Maybe she'd cleared the air for someone else, too. Later that night, Tamika returned to her temporary quarters. No interviews. No press calls. No tweets. Just the same military-issued duffel she'd arrived with, the same boots, the same silent discipline. She pulled out her phone and called her younger sister, Renee, back in San Antonio. "You saw it?" Tamika asked. Renee was laughing. "Saw it? Girl, your nephews have watched it like 20 times. Malachi asked if your jet could beat Spider-Man in a race." Tamika chuckled for real this time. "Tell him I'd put money on it." "And Mom?" Renee asked, her voice softening. Tamika's throat tightened. She'd have cried. She would have told everyone at church, Renee said. "I can hear her now. That's my baby flying that thing. Told y'all not to doubt her." Silence lingered between them for a beat. Then Tamika said, "You know, they told me to take off my uniform." Renee's voice sharpened. "They what?" "They said it didn't fit the tone." Renee exhaled. "And then you showed up with a whole fighter jet." "Damn right you did." Tamika smiled, but her eyes stared at the ceiling. "I wasn't trying to prove anything." "You didn't try, Tamika. You reminded them." Tamika closed her eyes. For a moment, the noise faded, the crowd, the applause, the fallout. All of it disappeared into a quiet place only she knew. The place that had carried her through training, through deployment, through every insult and every grin that didn't reach the eyes. And in that stillness, she could hear her father's voice again. "You're gonna walk into rooms where no one wants you there, and you'll still have to fly like you belong." She hadn't just flown like she belonged. She'd flown like she owned the sky. But the most important part? She hadn't waited for permission. The next morning, the aerospace conference resumed, but something had changed. It wasn't visible in the signage or the schedule, but in the eyes of the attendees. Something had shifted. Attention. A quiet reordering of hierarchy. No one said it outright, but everyone knew, the moment belonged to the pilot they'd tried to erase. Tamika Daniels. Her name had made it into the official summit report overnight, retroactively added, of course. Not under speakers or VIPs, but in a standalone paragraph under special demonstrations. The wording was cautious. Neutral. It acknowledged her affiliation with the Joint NATO Readiness Program. Not a word about how she'd been dismissed from registration for wearing her uniform. But by now, it didn't matter. Everyone already knew. By lunchtime, 5 different attendees had approached Brian Qualls, people who had never spoken to him before, asking if he had worked with Major Daniels, or if he'd been aware she was flying. He wasn't sure what to say. He hadn't worked with her. Had barely said hello. But he remembered what it felt like to see her fly, not just the jet, but through every assumption in that room like it was made of paper. And that's when he made a decision. Brian excused himself from a presentation on drone swarm logistics and slipped into a side hallway. From there, he found a quiet corner near a window overlooking the edge of the airfield. His fingers tapped rapidly against his phone screen. He opened LinkedIn, updated his profile photo to something new, a candid shot taken the week before, where he wasn't posing, just thinking. Then he began typing. "Yesterday I watched something I'll never forget. A pilot, a black woman in full flight gear, flew a Rafale jet over this entire conference like she owned the sky. Because she did. A day earlier, she was told her uniform didn't fit the tone. They didn't know her name. They do now. Her name is Major Tamika Daniels. And she didn't need an introduction. Just altitude." He clicked post and slid the phone into his pocket. 10 minutes later, his post had over 500 reactions. Elsewhere, Marissa Givens was seated in a glass-walled side office, her email open, her expression unreadable. She scrolled through coverage she didn't want to see. Major Sheikh Summit, surprise jet demo leaves attendees speechless. Silent flight, loud message, U.S. pilot makes unscheduled appearance, and it's all anyone's talking about. What stung the most wasn't the exposure. It was how easily they remembered Tamika's name, when 24 hours earlier, she hadn't even been welcome at the coffee station. Marissa glanced down at a fresh message from the Echelon internal comms team. "We'll need you to issue a clarification statement by end of day, something about the registration error. Keep it neutral." She began to type. "We regret any confusion related to uniform policy." She stopped. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then, slowly, she hit delete. The cursor blinked on an empty screen. She didn't finish the email. Because how do you explain that the person you brushed off is now the only thing people remember about your event? Back on the airfield, the Rafale had been rolled back into its temporary hangar. Tamika stood nearby, a checklist in hand, debriefing quietly with a technician. Her voice was calm, efficient, all business. She treated the moment like any other, because for her, it was. But then Staff Sergeant Bledsoe approached again, this time holding a small, unsealed envelope. "Ma'am, this just arrived. Hand-delivered from Echelon's executive office." Tamika raised an eyebrow. "Did they think I needed an apology?" "No note inside," he said. "Just this." She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single invitation card. It read, "Panel Restructure, Coalition Leadership Perspectives. Major Tamika Daniels, Opening Speaker. 0900 Hours Executive Room B." She looked at Bledsoe. "Did they ask?" "No, ma'am," he said. "They're not asking. They're hoping." Tamika smiled, not out of pride, but out of the quiet understanding that comes when the world catches up to something you've known all along. She looked at the jet one more time. Then tucked the card into her flight suit and walked toward the staging tent. Not to prepare for the panel. But to sit. To breathe. To remind herself that she didn't need a microphone or an audience to matter. She had already done what she came to do. And now the air around her was different, like the wind itself remembered. That evening, her phone buzzed with a call from Colonel Lefebvre. "Tamika," he said in that gravelly French voice. "You made headlines." "You sent me the jet," she replied. He laughed. "I sent a jet. You turned it into a message. The difference is you." She paused. "They didn't expect it." "They never do," he said. "That's why it lands harder." They spoke briefly about the logistics of returning the aircraft to NATO control. About protocol. About clearance. But before hanging up, Lefebvre added, "You reminded them that excellence doesn't need permission. It just needs space." She didn't say anything back. Because she knew he was right. And because words would never fly as high as what she'd already done. The next morning, the executive conference hall was standing room only. The coalition leadership panel was supposed to be a low-energy formality, a box to check for optics. Originally, Tamika's name hadn't even been on the seating chart. But today, every seat was filled. Not because of obligation. Because of curiosity. They wanted to see her. Wanted to hear what the woman in the flight suit, the one who tore through their skies without permission, would say when handed a microphone. Tamika Daniels didn't arrive with a team or a PR handler. She entered the side door of Executive Room B 15 minutes before the panel began, carrying only a worn leather notebook and a sealed water bottle. No fanfare. No strut. Just presence. She nodded to Colonel Reyes, already seated at the panel table. Reyes nodded back. Marissa Givens was also in the room, now a spectator. She wasn't coordinating today. She was watching. When the moderator stepped up to the podium, the chatter settled. "Good morning," he began. "Today's panel brings together voices from across Allied Command to discuss leadership, representation, and the future of cross-national operations. The words blended into white noise for Tamika. Her focus was ahead. Steady. Like it always was before takeoff. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't read from notes. She didn't stand behind the podium. She walked forward. Calm. Controlled. And began. When I was a cadet, I learned that a pilot's job is to navigate storms before they form. We're taught to anticipate pressure, to adjust before the turbulence hits. But nothing prepares you for navigating storms on the ground. The room was silent. You can have perfect credentials, hours in the sky, joint certifications from NATO, and still be mistaken for support staff at your own panel. You can wear a uniform that costs more than the suits in this room and still be told you're off tone. She looked directly at Marissa. Not with anger, with precision. But that's the thing about altitude. It changes perspective. When you're flying at 30,000 feet, no one cares about your dress code. All that matters is whether or not you know what you're doing. A murmur ran through the back rows. Tamika continued. Leadership isn't about comfort. It's about courage. And sometimes, courage means flying in, even when no one cleared a seat for you. Then she said something that would become the most shared quote of the entire summit. You don't need to be invited to a room when you can fly over it. Silence. Then applause. Not the polite kind. The earned kind. Colonel Reyes leaned in and whispered with a grin, you just rewrote every recruiting poster from the last 20 years. Tamika smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Because she hadn't come to be praised. She'd come to speak truth, and leave. After the panel, half a dozen people approached her with business cards and eager faces. Defense consultants. Project leads. One startup founder even asked if she'd consider being the face of our new military tech campaign. She declined them all, politely. I already have a job, she said. One where the sky answers faster than people do. Then she walked out. Back down the quiet hallway. Past the conference badges and the espresso machines. Past the sleek booths and tech mock-ups. Outside, the wind was picking up, desert grit sweeping across the road in short, angry bursts. But Tamika didn't flinch. She just stood for a moment, helmet in hand, staring out at the wide open space beyond the parking lot. She wasn't thinking about the panel. Or the applause. Or the sudden requests to be part of diversity initiatives. She was thinking about the next flight. The next challenge. The next room that didn't expect her, and what kind of entrance she might make. Behind her, the conference carried on like clockwork. Business as usual. But inside every attendee who'd watched her fly, something had shifted. A recalibration of what excellence looked like. What leadership sounded like. And who they'd have to stop underestimating from now on. 2 days later, the summit ended. The final aircraft displays were wheeled into hangars, booths were dismantled, and attendees filed out with carry-on bags, business cards, and just enough small talk to get them through the flight home. But one moment refused to fade, the Rafale, cutting across the Nevada sky like a blade, and the woman who flew it. Tamika Daniels didn't stay for the closing ceremony. She never intended to. Instead, she returned to the auxiliary airstrip just before sunrise. The air was cool, the ground quiet, the hangar still dim inside. Staff Sergeant Bledsoe was waiting, standing beside a ground crew already prepping the aircraft for transport. "You're not flying out today?" he asked as Tamika approached. "No," she replied, her voice low. "Transfer orders came through. They're sending the Rafale back to St. Dizier by carrier next week. My slot in the demo rotation's officially closed. Guess they finally figured out you weren't here to impress anyone." She glanced at him with a half-smile. "Wasn't ever about them." He nodded. Tamika walked to the plane one last time. She ran her hand across the nose cone, her fingertips brushing the cool metal. This wasn't just a jet. It was a chapter, and it had done what it needed to do. I left something in the cockpit, she said, climbing the ladder without waiting for permission. Inside, she sat for a moment, helmet in her lap, eyes closed. 1,000 memories swirled, late-night simulators, turbulent drills over the Pyrenees, the moment Moreau thanked her in broken English with calloused hands. But this jet, this flight, wasn't for them. It was for her. She reached into the side compartment and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A photo. From her JROTC days. She looked about 17, in a crisp blue uniform far too big for her, smiling awkwardly next to her father, who stood in his oil-stained coveralls, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder. She tucked the photo beneath the seat cushion. Let it stay there. Let the jet carry it wherever it would go. When she climbed down, Bledsoe handed her a clipboard. One last thing, press wants to interview you. Military Times. CNN. Couple of YouTubers. You want me to set that up? Tamika paused. Then shook her head. No. You sure? This could be big. It already was, she said. Without the cameras. Meanwhile, halfway across the country in San Antonio, Renee sat with her boys on the couch again. The clip of Tamika's flyover had made the national morning news. The anchor's voice said, a reminder that service, skill, and strength don't come in a single look. Major Tamika Daniels, the black woman pilot who turned a quiet protest into a sonic boom. Malachi turned to his mom. Can Aunt Tamika fly over our school? Renee smiled. Maybe. But she's not flying for show. Then who was that flight for? He asked. Renee looked at the screen. Tamika's jet was just a blur now, disappearing into the horizon. For everyone who thought they weren't allowed to take up space, she said. At Echelon Aerotech, the fallout had taken on a life of its own. The internal memo that once labeled Tamika a potential optics concern was leaked by a frustrated junior coordinator. An op-ed hit Medium the next day. You told her to change clothes. She changed the sky. Brian Qualls was the one who posted it. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't put Echelon's name on blast. He just told the story, respectfully, honestly, and it spread. He also applied to the Canadian Aerospace Fellowship that had reached out earlier. 3 weeks later, he got it. In his application essay, he ended with one sentence. Some people walk into rooms waiting to be seen. I want to walk in already flying. Back on base, Tamika settled into routine. No press. No podiums. Just mission logs, PT, and long hours in briefing rooms. Her locker was the same as always, quiet, clean, with a sticky note someone had slapped on it. Next time warn us when you break the sound barrier socially, too. She peeled it off and chuckled. Then stuck it back up. In her downtime, she read. Trained. Mentored younger cadets, especially the ones who didn't look like the mold. She didn't mention the conference. Didn't need to. Because the clip of her Rafale slicing the sky now played in more than just news reels. It had become training inspiration. Recruitment footage. Motivation in classrooms where girls sat in the back rows thinking maybe they didn't have what it took to lead in uniform. But now they had a face. A name. A flight. And the thing Tamika understood more than anyone was this. Not everyone claps when you arrive. Not every door opens with your badge. But you don't need their invitation when you bring your own jet. And sometimes, the best way to break a ceiling, is to fly over it. In a world where rooms are often locked and ceilings sealed shut, Major Tamika Daniels didn't knock. She didn't wait. She soared. And in doing so, she reminded all of us, you don't need to be invited when your purpose carries wings. Let her story be a signal to anyone who's been told to sit down, stay quiet, or take off the very thing that defines them. You don't have to fight the noise. Just make your presence undeniable. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who's fought to belong, share it. Leave a comment. Let us know who your Tamika is. And don't forget to subscribe to True Echo, where real strength isn't always loud, but it always leaves a mark.